to the Crane Bag Podcast. I am Jay Leeming, and today we are exploring the Mahabharata, a magnificent epic from India. This is part 2, so some things have happened. Here's a brief summary. We are in the forest with the great poet Vyasa, who is describing, narrating all of these events, dictating his great poem of the history of the human race to Ganesha, the elephant-headed god. But in this story that Vyasa is narrating, we've come to a difficult place where it seems that things cannot go forward. There are few main characters left. We have a king and a queen, Shantanu the king and Satyavati the queen. And they had 2 sons, but they both have died. And we have Bhishma, the eldest son, who has made a vow, explained in the first episode, never to know the love of woman, and so never to have children. And perhaps I should mention, Satyavati is past childbearing age, so it is impossible to have children by means of Shantanu and Satyavati. So it seems there's no one to carry the family forward in time. This is a story concerned not just with a kingdom in place, but a kingdom in time, duration. There are 2 princesses that Bhishma won in a tournament for the prince, who then died, and the names of the princesses are Umbika and Umbalika. Do not worry if you can't keep all this straight. You don't have to. It is a rushing river of story, and it will sort itself out in time. In some ways, that confusion is key to the problems at the beginning of this story. And so, shall we begin? So, let us begin. And so Vyasa said, "Well, Ganesha, the thing is, in desperate times, well, we have to do desperate things. So it's necessary for me to be inside this poem. Because you see, Satyavati, she is my mother. Years ago, before she knew King Shantanu, one day a wandering sage came to the edge of the river and asked to be ferried across. So my mother, Satyavati, led him on to that ferry. And he looked at her, and he fell instantly in love with her. Love flooded his heart like sunlight flooding the sky on a beautiful day. And he said, 'My dear, love is a flower that blossoms all too briefly. Let us two, you and I, enjoy this flower now, here in this moment, while the moment lasts.' And she laughed and said, 'Here, now? No, everyone will see.' So he spoke a sacred mantra, and soon that ferry was shrouded in fog. And he came close to her and whispered words of love. And she said, 'Sir, if we are to be together in this way, well, I will be changed. I will no longer be innocent. People will talk, and I will have to leave my father's kingdom and go live with you.' And where is that? A hut in the mountains, perhaps?" "It's true," he said. "I live in a hut in the mountains. It's no place for a family. So I say this. After we have enjoyed the delights of love, you shall be as innocent as you are now. And what's more, I will give you a boon, a magical gift. What is it that you desire?" And Satyavati thought for a moment, and she thought of her father's kingdom, and how everything always smelled of fish. And then she said, "I ask for this, that my body may always smell sweet." "You shall have that," said the sage, and he embraced her, and as he did so, that ferry was filled with the sweet aroma of roses. So together they climbed into that dark, beautiful music. And when that music had faded, they reached the other shore, and the sage got out, and he drifted away with the fog. And some time later, Satyavati gave birth to a child on an island, and that child was me, Vyasa, the one who stands before you now. And I grew up extremely fast, for my father was a sage with many powers, and he had given these powers to me. So on the day of my birth, soon I could already talk and I could walk. And I stood there in the grass and spoke to my mother and said, "Mother, I must leave you now. I must go to the mountains to live in harmony with Dharma, which upholds all things in creation. But please remember this. Whenever you need me, You need only think upon me, and I will be there. I will come, and I will help you. Mother, do not forget me. I will not forget you. Goodbye, my son, she said. Goodbye. And a moment later, I was gone. And my mother Satyavati sat there, looking at the grass where I had stood. And then after a while, she looked away. So years later, after the death of her second son, Vichitravirya, Satyavati succumbed to grief. And she lay weeping on her bed in the royal bedroom. No children, she said, no children. How can our family go on? And in her grief she thought of me. And she spoke my name aloud, and suddenly I was there, in the room. And I said, Mother, I have come. Mother, I have come to do what is necessary. Oh, my son, she said, you must go to these princesses. You must go to Umbika and Umbalika, to father children upon them, so that our family may go on. And so the princesses were prepared, and I went to Ambika. There she was, dressed in a beautiful dress, sitting on the bed in the royal bedroom. And I came to her, but she looked at me, and she said, Ah! And she closed her eyes. For I was, well, rather ugly to her eyes, hairy as I was, muddy, dirty, from living so long in the mountains, for living so long on silence and the ashes of this world. She looked at me, and she closed her eyes. And I came to her, and I said, My dear, you shall conceive a child by me tonight, but this child shall be born blind. And so it was, and the child was named Dhritarashtra. And the next night I went to Umbalika. And as I came to her bedroom, as she was sitting there on the bed, she looked at me and she said, Ah! And she turned pale in her face to see my ugly appearance. And I said to her, My dear, tonight you shall conceive a child as well, a son. But he shall be born with pale skin, and so he will be known as Pandu the Pale. And so, because Dhritarashtra was blind, Pandu the Pale was set on the throne. And Bhishma watched over the kingdom as he grew up, and when Pandu was of the marrying age, Bhishma found two princesses, Madri and Kunti, and they came and they were married to Pandu the Pale in the palace garden beneath the spreading mango tree. And all was well, and all was happiness in the kingdom. And then one day Pandu went hunting in the forest. And in that forest he found the tracks of two deer, and he followed these tracks, and he came upon two deer making love in the forest. And he pulled an arrow from his quiver and shot it at one of the deer, and then pulled a second arrow and shot it at the second deer, and the arrows plunged into the hearts of these deer, and as he watched they changed their shapes, and they became human. A sage, a man, and his wife in the forest, and the sage spoke and said, King, I curse you. You have not respected the joys of love. Yes, kings kill deer, but you could have waited till we had enjoyed the love between us. You have not respected love, and so I curse you. The next time that you take your wife in your arms, the next time you take either of your wives in your arms, you too shall die, just as I die now. And with that the sages turned back into deer, and the light left their eyes, and they died. And a wind blew over their bodies, and then they were only bones. What have I done? Said Pandu. What have I done? And he took his bow, and he cracked it over his knee, and he threw his arrows down, and he said, I must renounce the kingdom. I will harm no creature, no living creature. I will live on silence. I will follow the dharma of the wind. I will give up the kingdom. I will live in peace with all of creation. And he went sorrowfully back to the palace. And in their royal chambers he spoke with Kunti and with Madri, and he told them what had happened. And he took off his royal rings, and he took off his royal earrings and his crown, and he said, I am leaving this kingdom. I am going to the forest. And Kunti said, Pandu, as your queen, I will go with you. For this curse is not yours alone, but something we all must bear. Yes, said Madri, I will go with you. We all three will go into the forest. And they threw down their rings and their bracelets and their necklaces and their beautiful things. And the next day they left that kingdom. Bhishma and the lords and ladies of that kingdom went to the gate, and they watched them go. Watched them as they walked away from the palace into the forest, until they could not be seen any more. So Dhritarashtra, the blind king, was put on the throne. And though he was blind, he was still powerful, and so many princesses craved his company. And one day a princess came to marry him, and her name was Gandhari. And she came to the throne room, and she said, "O king, I am Gandhari. I have come to take your hand in marriage. It has all been arranged." And he said, "Come closer, dear, come closer." And she stepped closer. And then he said, "Please, put out your hands." And she put out her hands, and he reached out fumbling, and he took hold of them. And then he said, "My dear, may I touch your face?" "Yes," she said. And he put his hands on her face, and he felt her face, and he said, "You are very beautiful." And she said, You're blind. You're a blind king." "Yes," he said. "That's impossible. You can't have a blind king." "It is impossible," he said, "but it is what is happening. Nobody told me you were blind. What is the use of my face, of my dresses, of my beautiful hair?" And then she called out to one of her servants, "Bring me my black scarf." And a servant came, bringing that black silk scarf, and Gandhari held it in her hands, and she looked at the servant, and she looked at Dhritarashtra, and she looked at the beautiful ceiling of that throne room, and her servant said, "My lady, what are you doing?" And Gandhari said, I am looking for the last time at this world." And then she lifted the scarf and put it over her eyes. And she told her servant to tie it tightly behind her head. And so she entered darkness. And she reached her hands out, fumbling, and she found the hands of Dhritarashtra. And they fell into each other's arms, and they wept. And in the forest, Pandu, Madri, and Kunti lived there in silence, living off the generosity of this world, living on roots and leaves they found. And they made friends with many sages who lived in that forest. And together with them they chanted the prayers and the poems in praise of the gods, in praise of the Dharma of this world. And so they went forward as the wheel of time turned, and they lived without harming a single creature. They lived in peace and in harmony with all that was around them. But still, one evening, Pandu fell into grief and began to weep. "No children," he said. "No children. We are born on this earth with 4 debts to the world, to gods, to seers, to the ancient texts, and to ancestors. I have satisfied 3 of these debts, but not to my ancestors. I have no children. How can our family go forward? Time devours all things, but I had hoped that our family would live on for a little longer. No children, no children!" And he cried, and he wept. And Kunti went to his side, and she said, "Pandu, I have a secret. Yes, I have a secret mantra, a magical power given to me when I was but a young girl. For they came to our village, a wandering sage, hungry and tired out. My parents did not know, but I found him at the edge of the village, and I cared for him. I brought him bits of bread and of rice, and I helped him revive and restored him to health. And after a month had passed, he left, but not before he gave me a gift, a magical mantra by which I can call down any god at will and have a child by that god. Now I was a young girl. What did I know of these things? I wandered around dizzy with this power that was in me. I looked up. There was the sun, so glorious in the sky. And so I invoked that mantra. I called upon the sun god, and the sun god came down to earth. And that very day I had a child by him, a radiant child, born with a golden breastplate and golden earrings. What was I to do with a child such as this? I spoke to the sun god. I am innocent. How can I care for this child? People will talk. And the sun god said, "You are as innocent now as you were before." "Yes," I said, "but people will talk. What am I to do with the child?" And the sun god went away, and I was left. What could I do with a child? So I walked sorrowfully to the river, and I made a basket out of reeds. And weeping, I placed this radiant, beautiful boy into this basket of reeds, pushed it off, and it began to drift away. The child cried out once, I saw the glint of his golden breastplate, and then the current took the basket, and he went around some reeds and was gone. So, Pandu, I have this mantra still. I still have this magical power. And Pandu said, Kunti, use this power. Now invoke a god. Call upon Dharma, the harmony, the law of this world. And so Kunti invoked the god Dharma, and he came down to earth. And that very night she had a child by this god, a child named Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, destined to be king of the realm. And the next night Pandu said, Kunti, have another child by another god. Invoke Vayu, the god of the wind. So she used her mantra, and great winds came, and the god of the winds arrived, and that very night she gave birth to a son named Bhima. Bhima, destined to be the strongest man in the entire world. And the next night, again, hungry for children, Pandu said again, invoke your mantra, use it a third time. And she used that mantra, and she summoned Indra, the king of the gods. And he came down to earth that very night, and she gave birth to a son. And thunder cracked at the edge of the sky. He was a son named Arjuna, destined to be the greatest warrior this world has ever known. And then Madri came to Kunti and said, My dear, may I borrow this mantra, just for one night? Yes, said Kunti. And she whispered the mantra into her ears, and Kunti invoked the gods, the Ashvin, the gods with shining eyes, and that night she gave birth to 2 sons, twins born to her, Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins with shining eyes. So 5 radiant sons were born to Madri and to Kunti in the forest. Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, Bhima, the son of the wind, Arjuna, the son of Indra, king of the gods, and Nakula and Sahadeva. And so the Pandava, the sons of Pandu, were born. These are our heroes, said Vyasa. Our story will never leave them. Excellent, said Ganesha. Now meanwhile, in the palace in the city of Hastinapura, Gandhari was pregnant by Dhritarashtra. The months went by, 7 months, 8 months, 9 months went by, and she did not give birth. The wise women were there, the healers, trying to find out the problem, but 10 months went by. She was big in the belly, carrying this weight for such a long time. 11 months, 12 months, she called upon Shasti, the goddess of childbirth, but no relief came. Finally, 2 years went by. And after 2 years, she heard rumors from the forest, that Madri and Kunti had given birth to 5 beautiful, radiant sons. And Gandhari wept, fell into grief. What am I carrying? What am I carrying? 5 glorious sons, and I do not even have one. And she wept, and she knelt, and she pounded the earth, and then she pounded her belly. Wham! And she pounded it a second time. Wham! And she pounded it a third time. Wham! And she gave a great cry, and servants heard the cry and came running through the palace. And they came to the royal chambers, and there was Gandhari on the floor with blood all around her, and between her legs a large ball, so it seemed. And Gandhari said, Does it speak? What is it? Does it cry out? Does it breathe? And a servant girl reached out and touched the ball. It is hard, she said. It is like a great iron ball. Throw it in the river, said Gandhari. Throw it in the river. I am a broken cup. I am useless. Throw it in the river. But I, Vyasa, entered the scene, and I came into that room, and I said, No, do not throw that ball away. Sprinkle it with fresh water. It will break down into 100 different embryos. Put them in 100 clay jars with a little butter, and bury them in a little bit of earth. Watch them for 2 months, and then you, Gandhari, shall give birth to 100 radiant and glorious sons. So this was done. And the 100 sons were put in the 100 jars and buried in a little bit of earth. And 2 months went by, and then at night there was a clattering sound, and the lid of the first jar opened up, and there was a baby there, and Gandhari rushed to that jar, and a baby came out, and it was Duryodhana, the first of her 100 sons, the eldest born of all her 100 sons. And at this moment, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, was pacing in the throne room, pacing in the moonlight which fell down, the moonlight which he could not see. And as he paced, he heard 7 jackals cry out at the edges of the sky, and the sky seemed to howl, almost to crack or to shatter. And then he heard footsteps entering the room. "Who is there?" he said. "Who is there?" And a voice said, "I am a sage, king, come from the mountains to bring you wisdom and a choice. Your eldest son, Duryodhana, has just been born, and the choice before you is this: your son or your kingdom. If this boy is allowed to live, he will bring ruin to your entire kingdom. He will lay waste this entire land. So you must kill your child. Kill this son. That is your choice, your son or your kingdom." "Kill my son?" said Dhritarashtra. "How can I do that? No, I can't do that." "That is your choice," said the sage. "Think on it carefully." And he turned and walked from the room. "Kill my son?" said Dhritarashtra. "No, never. I cannot do that." And the next night another son was born to Gandhari, named Dushasana. And the next night another jar was opened, and over 100 nights 100 radiant, glorious sons were born to Gandhari. And there was rejoicing in the kingdom. Meanwhile in the forest it was spring, and the flowers were blooming, and the birds were singing in the trees. And on a day in spring, King Pandu looked at Madri, and he liked what he saw. "Ah, my dear," he said, you are lovely today." "Pandu," she said, "do not come closer, do not approach me." And he said, "Oh, my dear, listen, all of creation sings. The birds sing in the trees. The rivers sing as they run through this land. Don't you wish to sing with me? Let us sing together in the old, beautiful way. Come to me now." And he reached out for her, and she said, "No, you think you are walking towards love, but you are walking towards death. Leave me, Pandu, leave me. Oh, my honey, now, in this moment, I want love more than I want life. Come closer." And he reached out for her, but she ran from him. And he ran after her, and he was faster, and soon he took hold of her and threw her down. And though she loved him, though she found him beautiful in her eyes, still she tried to fight him off, but he overpowered her. He took hold of her and made love to her there on the forest floor, and in that moment he died. So his ripening cry became the shriek of Madri. Kunti heard it. She came running through the forest. She saw Madri there on the forest floor, pushing the dead body of Pandu off of her. And Kunti said, How could you seduce him into death like this?" And Madri said, "It was not me. I tried to fight him off. He was under a spell. He could not be swayed. He came for me. I could not stop him." And she burst into tears. And Kunti said, "Then I envy you. For you have something I do not, for you have seen him happy in your arms." And they wept together in the forest. And then Kunti said, "And now I must follow him to the other shore." "No," said Madri, "I will go. It was my beauty which caused this. I am responsible for this. I will follow Pandu. I will journey with him to the other world. I ask you, Kunti, only this. Please care for my sons, Nakula and Sahadeva. Treat them as your own." "I will," said Kunti. "Goodbye, goodbye," said Madri. And she turned and walked away into the forest. And she started a fire there, and built it higher and higher, until it was a raging bonfire. And then with a clear mind and a clear heart, she walked into that fire. And Kunti wept, and held her 5 children, the Pandava, close. And soon news of the death of Pandu and of Madri spread to the sages in the forest. And 108 of these sages came to Kunti, and they cared for her, and for the 5 children, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, and Nakula, and Sahadeva. And some time later they all walked out of the forest, back towards the city of Hastinapura, back towards the palace. It was late afternoon when they arrived. Guards on the towers had seen them coming, and so everyone ran to the palace gate. Bhishma was there, and they opened the gate, and there was Kunti, and there were the 5 Pandava, and there were the 108 sages from the forest. And the man who is chief amongst the sages spoke and said, King Pandu and his queen Madri have died in the forest. The world is no longer young. The golden age is over. Difficult times are ahead. Farewell. And with that, in the blink of an eye, all 108 of those sages vanished, disappeared, and there was only Kunti there and the 5 Pandava. And Satyavati wept to hear this, and Umbalika, the mother of Pandu, and Umbika, the mother of Dhritarashtra, they all 3 broke into tears, weeping and wailing at the palace gates. And then and there the 3 of them resolved to leave the kingdom, to renounce kingship of all kinds, and to go into the forest, and to live in silence and in harmony with all things, to live in harmony with the Dharma of this world. And that evening, everyone, all the lords and ladies and the servants, took the bodies of Madri and of Pandu, and carried them out of the palace and down to the river Ganges. And they placed the bodies there beside the river, and the words were said, the beautiful words pouring out into the air of that moment. And they set fire to the bodies, and the flames went up, and the smoke rose up into the sky. And the sad songs were sung, and the poems and chants went out into the night. And the people wept for a long, long time. And when the bodies of Pandu and of Madri had been devoured by the flames, when the songs had all become silence, and the smoke had gone up for the last time into the sky, then Bhishma went to the 5 Pandava, the sons of Pandu, who were Yudhishthira, the son of Dharma, Bhima, the son of the wind, Arjuna, the son of Indra, Nakula and Sahadeva, the twins with the shining eyes. And he looked at them and he said, Little ones, you have learned much in the forest. But now you have come here to the kingdom of the Kurus, to the city of Hastinapura. This is the kingdom you were born to come home to. It is where you belong. Welcome. And now may your story truly begin. Hey, Jay Leeming here with you on the Crane Bag podcast. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for giving it your attention, your time. It's a wild story. A lot of things just happened. But I invite you to think back over all these images, these characters who come and go, and see if there's moments in there which speak to you. It's a glittering river at this point. And I should say perhaps that the story, the epic of the Mahabharata, will slow down after this point and focus just on these main characters. But we've churned up the earth, and there are seeds in that earth which will blossom later, as perhaps you can tell. For me, when I think back over this story, I think of Gandhari, the princess, finding out that Dhritarashtra, The blind king is, in fact, blind. And holding her silk scarf in her hands and putting it over her eyes. That moment when she looks around and she says, "This is the last I will see of this world," and joins her husband in darkness, and they weep. Is it oppressive? Possibly. Is it impressive? Is it patriarchal in some way? Well, it could be all those things. But just looking at it now as image, as moment, as a little crystal of dream language come to us from this story, it's sad and it's beautiful to me. And later, Gandhari gives birth to an iron ball. Wow, crazy. The sons born out of the pots in the earth, 100 sons, in darkness. Jackals cry as the first one climbs out of the earth. And Pandu, killing the 2 deer, the wind passing over them, and they become bones. Beautiful. Again and again in this story, it seems to be wrestling with the push-pull of the world and renunciation of the world, the kingdom and the forest in this case. Do we find who we most are? Are we most truly ourselves when we're with others, when we are in action, in the kingdom, on the battlefield, in the city? Or do we find who we truly are in retreat, in renunciation, when we are in harmony with the forest, with living things, when we retire from ambition, from victory and failure, and try to live in peace? I think that's an open question. This story doesn't have an answer, but its characters keep living this out in various ways, and it's beautiful to watch. Horrific at the same time, but beautiful as well. Also, the poet who is credited with writing the Mahabharata, named Vyasa. We met him in the first episode. At one point, he's asked why he is doing this, and his answer is, "I have written this poem to inscribe Dharma into the hearts of men." To inscribe Dharma into the hearts of the men and women of this world. Dharma, well, that's a big subject. What is that? It's an untranslatable word from Sanskrit, meaning that which makes a thing itself, basically. Well, literally meaning that which supports, that which holds up. Holds up what? Well, holds up the universe. But more specifically, that which makes the thing itself. It is the dharma of a candle to burn. It is the dharma of water to flow. It is the dharma of the storyteller to tell a story. So upholding that and honoring that and being aware of that is crucial in these stories. And again we see these chains of action and consequence. In some ways, this epic is like a laboratory looking at those actions. What is right action for us? What is the best thing for us to do? What is wrong action? What leads to suffering? What leads to liberation, to joy, to harmony? When Dharma is destroyed, Dharma destroys. When Dharma is preserved, Dharma preserves. That's a sentence also from this epic. We might think of that in terms of the natural world, certainly. The rivers, the trees, you know. When Dharma is preserved, it preserves. When Dharma is destroyed, it destroys. That's a sentence to remember in the face of climate change, hurricanes, drought, etc., the viruses. But this epic, that's what he says. That's what Vyasa says. I've written this to inscribe Dharma in the hearts of the men and women of this world. So how does that happen? Well, we look at stories, we see what people do, what actions they take, and whether it turns out happily or unhappily for them or for the world. Perhaps sometimes a character, a person, one of us, must be unhappy to preserve something greater than ourselves. That's a question which will become more urgent as this story goes on. So again and again at this point in the epic, we have characters making decisions, and often they take the form of a vow. These vows come over and over again. Bhishma vowing to give up forever the love of woman. He does that to preserve the kingdom, so that his father can know love, so that there will be no war. Was that a good decision or a bad one? Well, we will find out. Amba, who makes the vow to kill Bhishma. Bhishma, who is given the power by the gods to choose the moment of his own death. But she is going to, she's going to help him make that choice. She is going to kill him. So she makes that vow. We see Kunti putting the child in the basket, her first child born of the sun god, into a basket. And the golden breastplate he has and the golden earrings this little baby has. And she puts him in the river and he floats away. Was that good? Was it bad? Is it a third thing that can't be defined by those two words? Well, we don't know, but we are perhaps, I would say, spoiler alert, going to meet that child again. And of course, Pandu, who makes the vow to give up the kingdom and go to the forest, and to live without harming a single creature. What a beautiful vow. I think many of us in these days share that wish. You know, there's folks, you don't buy, people who don't want to buy leather shoes because they don't want to harm the animals, vegans, vegetarians, and all kinds of people. We see the loss of life around us, of the human world and in the animal world, and we want to prevent that. We don't want to be part of that. So we try to make decisions which don't lead to that. And so that's similar to what Pandu does there when he renounces the kingdom. I'm not going to live in the battlefield with kings and queens and fighting, deals, politics. No, forget it. I'm going to the forest, people. I'm going to live there. I will harm no being. Beautiful, beautiful. And I guess in my own life, to just grab two random moments, I see myself working as a temp at Martha Stewart Omnimedia in New York City, right off Bryant Park. And that office, I tell you, was an inferno of ego, money, and power. Oh man, arguments, people yelling at each other, deadlines. Wow, crazy. I was a temp in that office for a little while. And then I see myself in Vermont. When I got sick of living in New York City, I sought out a life in Vermont, which was different. I worked for a carpenter there, pounding siding into the side of a house. I remember the post offices, the Brooklyn post office. Yeah, bulletproof glass over the desks where the people are, a long line to pick up a single package. You know, it's like 20 people. A guy with an unlit cigar at the front of the line. He's not working for the post office. He doesn't have anything to pick up. He's just there to talk and make sure everything goes okay. And he's talking to people as they go through the line. And me at the end of that line. Feeling like, wow, I'm in it. And then in Vermont, you know, not to dump on New York and praise Vermont, but that little post office where I walk in and they're like, oh, Jay, how you go? Oh, you got a package this week. Here you are. You're outside, birds singing, grass, trees. Well, anyway, I'm not putting that up as a question of how to live or as saying, well, one's better than the other, but just the feeling I had of being in it, in this big beast of New York City, in the heart of things. It's all happening where it's all at. And then of being way out in Vermont, which, you know, is still the heart of the world in many ways. But for me, at that moment, it felt like, oh, yes, all right, I'm in something different now. I've renounced all that stuff, the money, the power. I'm in Vermont. Anyway, perhaps you can find images from your own life which fit those two poles of that decision. So I think the project of this epic, among many things, is to give us a way to look at action and consequence by giving us a great deal of both of those things, actions and consequences. And so we can reflect on it and ask ourselves the questions. What is right action? What is wrong action? And famously, we'll get that in a big way from the god Krishna, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. He will show up much later in this story, and he will give us a good, solid answer to that question in the Bhagavad Gita, which is his advice to Arjuna on the battlefield before the big war to end all wars. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's the river, there's the sea, there's the mountain where the river starts out, and there's the drop of water in your hand. If you were feeling lost in this story, well, like I say, it's going to slow down after this, and perhaps hold on to a drop, a shining drop from this river of story, and see what it has to say to you. Give it a moment to let it speak. Thank you for listening to this story. There are more stories on my website, which is jayleeming.com, JayLeeming.com. And if you're able to support this podcast, please do so. Through the pandemic, it has been a great help to me. And it's given me the freedom to take on projects like this, crazy projects like this, like telling this epic, which I don't know how many episodes it's going to be, but it's going to be a big deal. And try to hold it in my voice and in my life. So thank you for all those who have been able to support this podcast. If you're able to join them, please do so. You can do that by going to patreon.com/storyjl. And you can support this work there. Thank you for listening to this story. May this story listen to you. May we find it in our lives in a way that does not harm us but teaches us and inspires us. May the bees hum amid the flowers. May the river flow from the mountain to the sea. May the sea sing as it does. May we hear that sound late at night, early in the morning, in the moments when we most need it. Thank you for listening to this, and take care.